All right, let's travel back in time to the turn of the 20th century. The United States was standing at a huge crossroads. For its first 100 years or so, the whole story was about expanding westward, about manifest destiny, filling out the continent. But in just a few short decades, that story was about to change completely. America was getting ready to step onto the world stage and transform itself from a former colony into a global empire.
And this image right here, it just perfectly captures the energy of the time. That's Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders in Cuba. It is bold, it's action-packed, and it really shows a nation feeling its own strength, looking outward for new frontiers to conquer. This wasn't just about one single battle, it was about a whole new American attitude.
And that leads us to the big, almost contradictory question of this entire period. How does a country that was founded on ideals of liberty and self-determination, a country that literally fought a revolution to break away from an empire, end up creating an empire of its own? That is the story we are going to unpack right now.
So to really get this shift, we have to look at the powerful forces that were pushing the nation in this totally new direction. So what was the why? What was behind America's sudden imperial ambition? Well, it really boils down to three key things. First, a desire for military strength, especially a powerful navy, so it could hang with the other big world powers. Second, a major thirst for new markets. American farms and factories were producing way more than people at home could actually buy, so they needed new customers for all their stuff. And third, this belief in cultural superiority, this idea that the U.S. had a duty to spread its values and civilize the rest of the world.
And here you can literally see an idea becoming a reality. On one side, you've got the thinker, Admiral Alfred T. Mahan. He's the guy who argued that to be a great nation, you had to have a great navy. And on the other side, you see his idea made real, the Great White Fleet. This was America's brand new, steel-hulled navy, painted brilliant white and sent on a world tour to show off America's new muscle. This wasn't some theory in a book anymore. This was cold, hard steel.
Now, before the U.S. just plunged headfirst into empire building, it kind of dipped its toes in the water first with a couple of early and very different moves. Let's take a look at the acquisitions of Alaska and Hawaii, because they really set the stage for what was about to happen. First up, Alaska. Back in 1867, the Secretary of State William Seward bought it from Russia for just $7.2 million. That's about 2 cents an acre. At the time, people thought he was crazy. They called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Well, it turns out they couldn't have been more wrong. That so-called folly ended up being an unbelievable bargain, totally packed with timber, minerals, and, a whole lot of oil.
The story of Hawaii, though, is much more complicated and honestly pretty tragic. Here we see Queen Liliuokalani, who was Hawaii's last monarch. For years, American sugar planters had become incredibly rich and powerful on the islands. And when she tried to pass a new constitution that would give more power back to Native Hawaiians, those powerful business interests, with the help of U.S. Marines, they organized a revolution and just overthrew her.
And her own words from that time are just so powerful. In her official protest, she made it clear she was yielding her authority not to the new rebel government, but to the United States itself, hoping to avoid bloodshed. It's just a poignant reminder that this American expansion often came at the direct expense of other people's right to rule themselves.
But the one event that truly launched America as a world power was a conflict that one official actually called a splendid little war, the Spanish-American War. Tensions had already been building with Spain over how brutally it was handling a rebellion in Cuba. Then, on the night of February 15, 1898, the U.S. battleship Maine just mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor, killing more than 260 American sailors. To this day, nobody knows for sure what caused it, but in the heat of the moment, the real cause didn't even matter.
The American newspapers immediately pointed the finger at Spain. They were deep into what was called yellow journalism, sensational, often totally exaggerated reporting just to sell more papers. They printed these fiery headlines, and Remember the Maine became this massive rallying cry that pushed a hesitant President McKinley and a really fired-up public straight into war.
And the war itself was unbelievably fast. It was fought on 2 fronts. One in the Caribbean, over Cuba, and the other, which was a surprise to many Americans, was halfway around the world in the Philippines, another Spanish colony. In just a few months, from April to August of 1898, the United States had completely crushed the Spanish forces in both places.
So the war is over. But the really crucial part is what happened next. The Treaty of Paris officially ended it all. But just look at the terms. Spain freed Cuba,
and then it handed over Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States. And then, for the price of $20 million, it sold the entire Philippine Islands to the U.S. And just like that, America had an empire.
But, owning an empire wasn't so simple. It came with a very heavy price, and it sparked one of the fiercest debates in American history, and led to a brutal, often forgotten war.
The biggest question was what to do with the Philippines. This kicked off a massive debate across the country. On one side, you had the imperialists arguing it was America's duty to educate and Christianize the Filipinos. They also saw the islands as a perfect gateway to trade in Asia. But on the other side, anti-imperialists, including huge names like Mark Twain, fired back, saying that denying self-government to another country violated the very ideals of the Declaration of Independence.
And this cartoon just perfectly illustrates that anxiety. You see Uncle Sam here on this new bike, and the wheels are the Western and Eastern hemispheres. He's wobbling, trying to keep his balance, while all the other world powers are just watching, basically waiting for him to crash. It captures that anti-imperialist fear that this whole empire thing was just un-American and totally unmanageable. The financial price tag for this new empire was steep. You see, the Filipinos, led by a man named Emilio Aguinaldo, had been fighting Spain for their own independence. They thought the Americans were their allies. So when they realized the U.S. was just the new colonial boss, they declared war. The result was the brutal 3-year Philippine-American War, which cost the United States $400 million. That's 20 times the original purchase price.
But the financial cost, that pales in comparison to the human cost. As this chart shows so starkly, over 4,000 American soldiers died, but an estimated 200,000 Filipinos, most of them civilians, lost their lives from fighting, famine, and disease. It was just a horrific price to pay for an empire, and it completely dwarfed that original $20 million price tag.
But despite all the costs and all the controversies, the turn of the century saw America firmly establish itself as a new world power, with leaders who are absolutely ready and willing to use that power.
And nobody embodied this new role more than Theodore Roosevelt. His entire foreign policy was guided by this West African proverb he loved: speak softly and carry a big stick. The basic idea was you should always try to negotiate peacefully, but you should always have the credible threat of military force to back you up.
This cartoon shows exactly how the world saw him. Roosevelt as the world's constable, using that big stick of his to police the Western Hemisphere. He basically updated America's old foreign policy, the Monroe Doctrine, which had warned Europe to stay out of the Americas. Roosevelt's add-on, called the Roosevelt Corollary, went a big step further. It said the U.S. would now actively intervene in Latin American countries to keep the European powers out. America had basically just declared itself the region's policeman.
And the ultimate example of this big stick policy in action was the Panama Canal. Roosevelt desperately wanted a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans for his new navy. When Colombia, which owned Panama at the time, refused his deal, the U.S. conveniently supported a Panamanian rebellion. The brand new nation of Panama then happily signed a treaty, and the U.S. got to build its canal, a massive feat of engineering that completely reshaped global trade.
So we'll end with this final thought. In a really short span of time, the U.S. got an empire, built a world-class navy, and declared itself the boss of its hemisphere. The question for us, looking back today, is how do these huge decisions made over a century ago continue to shape and influence America's role, its responsibilities, and its challenges on the global stage right now?